I'm Jennifer Della Quadri, and this is the Raising Happy Teens podcast, where you learn how to successfully guide your teenager into adulthood without losing your sanity in the process. Let's do this. Welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Katie K. May, author of the best-selling book, You're on Fire, It's Fine, Effective Strategies for Parenting Teens with Self-Destructive Behaviors, and founder of Creative Healing, a teen support center in Pennsylvania. Katie uses her education and lived experience to help shorten the struggle for those who come after her. If you have a teenager who is resorting to self-destructive behaviors to cope, this episode is a must listen. Be sure to check out Katie K's book and online community and share this episode with other parents you know would benefit from this information. Now, on to the show. All right, I am here with Katie. I'm so excited to have you on this podcast. Before we get into all of the things that I would love to talk with you about, just take a minute to briefly introduce yourself and tell my audience who you are.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, for having me. My name is Katie K. May. I'm the author of You're on Fire, It's Fine. I wrote a book for effective strategies in parenting teens with self-destructive behaviors. And in addition to that, I lead a team of therapists in the Philadelphia area where we work with teenagers and their parents who are engaging in self-destructive behaviors.
And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on is because so many of the parents who come to me see self-destructive behaviors in their teenager, and they feel so helpless to do anything about it. And they just feel really lost and confused. And so, of course, I wanted to have you on to talk about your experience. And one of the things that I'd love to share is your mission. It says, I read on your website, your mission is to help teens know they aren't weird, bad, wrong, or different for feeling the way they do, and to help parents create an environment where teens are deeply understood and fully accepted for who they are. So before I even ask you about that, I just want to let my audience hear it, because there's two parts to this here. It's the teen and it's the parent, and it's a struggle for both. So let me ask you this. What is it that inspired this mission for you, and how did you come into this line of work?
I am what I would call, or I was what I would call a troubled teen. I struggled a lot in my teenage years being raised by a single dad who had no idea how to parent a teen girl, let alone one with these big emotions, one that I call a fire feeler who experiences emotions so deeply and intensely. And because of that, I had a highly invalidating environment that led to a lot of my own self-destructive behaviors. And coming through the other side of that, making meaning of it meant going to school and becoming a therapist to help others who help others like me, so they didn't have to struggle so much. And the other side of that is that now I'm the parent of a teenager who has some mental health concerns. And so I'm able to really approach this topic from all sides as a teen who got through this, as a professional who specialized in this for over a decade, and as a parent who understands the depths of pain and grief and struggle that we experience when our teenager is struggling. And so it really just feels so special and important to me to be able to serve this population.
It's really a gift. And having that perspective that you have in the lived experience, I think, is something that can really add to the level of support that you're able to offer. And you had mentioned that growing up, you lived in an invalidating experience. And so let's talk a little bit about what that means. What's an invalidating experience? Tell me more about how that can impact teens and where you use this information in the work you do.
Yeah, an invalidating environment. And when I say environment, it means parents, siblings, coaches, teachers, peers. The environment is anything that gives us feedback about who we are and how we navigate the world. And so when that environment is invalidating, it is people saying, it's not a big deal. Just get over it. Just use your coping skills. Maybe you're hungry or tired. Take a nap, have a snack, go take a walk. Everything's going to be fine. I was just joking. Why are you so sensitive? So it's giving the message that how somebody feels is wrong, bad, different, or too much. And when an individual experiences that invalidation over and over and over throughout their lives, they begin to question their own ability to trust their experience. Like, am I sad? Is this too much? Am I wrong? Is my gauge off? Do I not know how to truly assess the situation or respond to it? And so the invalidated individual learns that their experience is not correct and that they should be doing something differently, but because their biology doesn't allow that, because they're sensitive, they experience emotions deeply, they just grow up with this internalized messaging that something is wrong with them or they're defective.
Yeah. It's like feeding into that message, like, you're not good enough. And
Yeah.
that's something I talk about all of the time. And a lot of the time, this comes from the parents' lived experience too. That's how they were treated when they were younger. And so the cycle just continues. So if I have parents listening right now who are like, gosh, that was how I was raised, and I see myself doing this to my teen, I didn't realize how harmful it can be. What would you recommend? Where can they start with this?
The first step is exactly what you said, is that awareness. And I always say the greatest gift that you can give to your child is being a regulated parent. And that means starting with noticing, I want to do something differently than my parents did, and I want to break that chain. And so that's a beautiful thing. And once you have that awareness that maybe you're reacting in the same way that your parent did, it's starting to notice a name, which is a foundational skill that I talk about in my book. Being able to notice your internal experience. I feel like the blood is boiling in my chest. I'm noticing my shoulders rise up to my ears. And instead of lashing out or demanding something of my teen, I'm going to name my experience and do something about it. You know what, child? I'm feeling a little on edge, or I'm starting to feel really frustrated, or I'm having the urge to yell right now. I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to go walk the dog. I don't want to have this conversation right now because I don't want to say something I'm going to regret. So, noticing your experience, naming it, and then doing something about it.
That's one of the things that is probably the hardest when it comes to parenting, is having to do the internal work that it takes to be able to stop and take a breath when you're feeling triggered. I
For
know I
sure.
talk about that all of the time. But I wanted to speak. You had mentioned first of all, I haven't even told my listeners the title of your book. You're on fire. It's fine. And I always think about that meme with the character and the big dumpster fire going on. And it's basically like what's going on. And you also mentioned fire feelers. So clearly, fire is a big part of what you are describing in this behavior. Where did you get that term fire feelers? What's it all about? Tell me a little more about that.
Yeah, so it actually was inspired by that meme of the I'm fine dog, the one that's in the fire saying,
Yeah.
I'm on fire, and or I'm fine. The dog is saying, I'm fine, and there's this fire that's going on around them. And so
Yeah.
that was part of where my thinking came from. But the idea is that these biologically sensitive individuals, those that are very sensitive, who might react quickly, who are 0 to 60 in 10 seconds flat and take a long time to come back to baseline, they experience emotions as if they are on fire with that emotion. It is all consuming. It's their whole body, all of their nerve endings are experiencing that emotion. And I like to illustrate it that way for parents to help them understand that if they're responding to a teen saying, "You're fine, everything's okay," it's like having a little squirt gun and trying to put out a fire. It's also the way we make sense of how teens or individuals could find themselves thinking about or considering a self destructive behavior or acting on a self destructive behavior. Because if you think that my feelings are so big, it feels like I'm on fire with them. But if my brain comes up with a way to escape that fire, of course I'm going to do that. So it makes sense why teens might turn to drugs or alcohol, suicidal ideation, self harm, some of these other behaviors that quickly regulate an emotion, bring it back down. So that's how we call them fire feelers, because it really illustrates the intensity of the emotion as they experience it.
Do you find, I mean, obviously you work with the population, the teens right now, and also you, I can imagine, consider yourself to be a fire feeler, or you were at least. Do you find that the generation of teenagers that are teens right now, young adults, and even maybe preteens, are you finding that they seem to be in the larger majority fire feelers than in the past? Or is this something that, I'm just curious because that's something I'm observing, but I just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't think so. I think it's biologically, I read somewhere about 20% of the population has that highly sensitive disposition. And what I find is that the more work I do with the teenagers, the more the parent of that teen is like, you know what? I'm like that. I'm a
Yeah.
fire feeler. So we find that at least one of the parents of the teens that we're working with starts to identify with being a fire feeler as well.
Okay, that makes sense. I've talked about highly sensitive people, so it makes sense that it would be handed down from generation to generation. And let's talk a little bit more about the self-destructive behaviors because
Yeah.
that is the biggest concern. I can imagine my listeners who are wanting to learn more about this. Talk a little bit more about the behaviors and what parents can do when they see that their teenagers are engaging in them.
When I say self destructive behaviors, I'm talking about any behavior that is moving someone away from their life goals and or it could be life threatening or self-sabotaging. So the majority of clients that I work with personally are self-harming or engaging in some kind of suicidal behavior. But we also work with clients with eating disorders, clients with substance use disorders, and sometimes it's just inability to get to school or some other behavior that's really getting in the way of a life goal or a life worth living. And it's a tough thing for a parent to watch their child self destruct. So there are many steps to approaching this, but the first one I will always go back to is being able to manage your own feelings about that. And I want to explain why, because if your teen, let's say self harm, if your teen is engaging in self harm, and they notice that anytime it's brought up, approached, alluded to, your face all of a sudden goes into anxiety and shock, or you tend to recoil or react or threaten or try and over control. They're not going to be able to trust you to come to you with that information before they act on it because they're going to be afraid that you're going to punish them or that you're going to fall apart and that they're going to either have to take care of you or feel guilty for making you feel bad. And so before we can even get to the concrete and practical, and we can talk about that too, but parents need to be able to hold that information without outwardly reacting in a way that makes teens feel worse.
How do you recommend that a parent do that? Because it understandably so, my lived experience, and I'm imagining yours as well. When something like that happens, it's automatically going to trigger a
Of
person and
course.
potentially throw you into fight or flight. What do you recommend parents do to keep themselves from reacting like that?
Yeah, it's a couple things. One is understanding the function of those behaviors. We go back to understanding a fire feeler goes to those behaviors when something is overwhelming for them, when it's outstrips their ability to cope. And so their brain's coming up with a solution. So what you see as a problem is a problem, but it's actually the teen's solution to a problem. So we want to dig deeper. We want to understand, we want to validate. I can see that you must be really struggling if your brain is coming up with ways to hurt yourself as a way to cope with this. So it's joining on the same side as your teen, being able to validate them. And then I also think coming into community with other parents who are having these same experiences so that you can talk about them in a place where you get to be held supported and not the one who is supporting someone else. And that piece is so important.
It really is because it can feel so isolating as a parent. Like you're the only one going through it, especially in the era of social media where everybody's posting their highlight reel,
Yeah.
to feel like you're the only one who has a child who's struggling. So once the parent is able to regulate their nervous system and at least lean in with compassion, then what practical steps can they do to support their teen when this is happening?
Yeah. So once you're able to regulate yourself, once you're able to lean in with compassion, once you're able to validate, then we're moving into some change strategies. And so what I like to do is work with parents to really pay attention to when are you providing warmth to your teen? When are you providing attention to your teen? Because we talk about feeding the meter, which is positive reinforcement for the behaviors you'd like to see. So for example, if every time your teen comes to you and tries to talk to you, you're distracted and cooking dinner, or hold on 1 second, let me finish this text, or hold on, I'm doing something over here. They're getting the message that you're not available for them to talk to you, to talk to them. And so, but then if they engage in some kind of self destructive behavior and then you're giving them all the attention, well, their brain is learning When I do this thing, I get mom's full attention. So,
Yeah.
one of the biggest and most powerful things you can do as a parent is pay attention to where your attention is going and try and
Mhm.
move that attention to before any of these behaviors occur.
Oh, very proactive for
Yes.
sure. Yeah, and it's really like a light bulb went on in my head. It's like it's true. Attention is attention, and if it's
Mhm.
attention for the self-destructive behavior, so be it. But it's basically the teen saying, "I need some love. I need some attention." So giving them that in advance, and I love that filling the meter analogy. It's something that you can visualize in your head, and making sure that you are affirming them and their life choices and validating their experiences along the way. So, being proactive. Okay. What else do you recommend parents do?
Yeah. So, and along with that, I like to say 5 to 1. So, being able to do 5 positives to every one criticism or redirection. So, we're being really mindful of feeding that meter. The other part of that is understanding what we are accidentally reinforcing. So, again, if every time your teen complains, you're feeding into that and you're saying, well, this is what we have to do. And you continue to talk back, you continue to engage in that conversation. You're accidentally reinforcing that complaints get a lot of attention, get this conversation, allows them to continue this conversation. So pay attention. If you're noticing something show up in your teen that you don't like, this is my biggest message. Pay attention to what you are doing that's keeping that going.
Yeah, kind of like turning things around on yourself and being more reflective
Yes,
versus
exactly.
pointing fingers. You.
Yes.
Okay. You talk about big emotions
Mhm.
and why teens resort to these self-destructive behaviors. I heard you say that one of the reasons is their emotions are just filling them up too much and it's an outlet.
Mhm.
Any other reasons that you experience in your line of work that teens would resort to this so that parents can better understand why this is happening?
Yeah. So again, it is in an effort to solve a problem. And that's going to be so individualized for each client, but I can give some examples. One of the biggest one is an emotion is too big and overwhelming, and so that behavior makes the emotion calm down. The other
Mhm.
one is, and I used to see this a lot when I worked in a psychiatric hospital, teens would come to parents and they would say, I'm sad, I'm depressed. And parents would say, you know what, I was moody when I was a teenager. Being a teen, you're going to be moody, you're going to be sad sometimes, everything's fine. And then they would up the ante, they would be crying, mom, I really, like, something's not right, I think I should talk to someone. And it would get put off and it would get dismissed, and then all of the sudden they would have some bigger behavior, let's say running away, stealing a car, hurting themselves, doing something to get in trouble. And then the parent would say, you know what, we need to get you help. And so they
Yes.
would finally get their need met. And so when we're looking at any kind of behavior, we want to understand that that behavior communicates a message. And it's either I can't handle this, or you're not hearing me, or some other message, but we want to understand the message behind the behavior.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And some of the parents that I talk to, their teenager, when they're resorting these behaviors, when the parent is coming around and saying, let's get you some support, sometimes those teenagers aren't really open to going to therapy or getting support. Would you have any recommendations for parents who are experiencing that?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. Like, my teen doesn't want to be in therapy, but they desperately need it. And what do I do? And so, this is when I share research about unilateral change. And the truth is that it only takes one person in a family system to start changing in order for everyone else to change. So, if your teen is not willing to go to therapy, but they're engaging in some kind of self destructive behaviors, starting in parent therapy, learning how to regulate yourself, learning how to validate, learning how to use those feed the meter reinforcement strategies, and some of the other things that come with that, is going to make shifts in the home environment. The thing that I always warn parents of, though, when they're using unilateral change as a strategy, is that something will happen called an extinction burst. And so, as you are making changes, it is natural in any system for the other party to want to keep things the same. And so they will continue to up the ante. They might yell, they might make threats, they might punch holes in the wall, or whatever, your teen does, because they're trying to keep things the same. And so I'll have parents who start unilateral change, And then they'll say, well, now my teen is punching walls. And so this isn't working. It's actually making things worse. But what I say is it's actually making things better. They're just working to keep the status quo.
Wow. I love that you explained that so articulately because so many parents feel so lost and so confused and they don't know what to do when their teen doesn't need help. And to be able to continue consistently to make changes and be that person, knowing that even though they're pushing back, it is making a change can be so affirming that you're on the right path. Like,
Yeah.
even though you're really pushing back, there's actually good things happening. So, thank you for sharing that. That's really great. So, one of the questions that I would like to ask you as we talk a little bit further about the destructive behaviors is, let's say a parent has had a rocky relationship with their teen up until this point and they're recognizing that
Mhm.
this is not going well. Where can they start? Where's a good accessible starting point for parents?
Yeah, so when we're looking at improving relationships, I like to explain it through what I call the hierarchy of connection. And this gives us a clear path of how to reconnect with our teen when things have been very tense or there has been a lot of conflict by history. And so we want to start with that bottom level of that hierarchy of connection is just being in the same room as your teen without something happening, without an argument happening, or without criticizing them. So the example I use, because it's one that happens in my home, is like I could be in the kitchen cooking dinner, putting groceries away, and my teen is in the living room, which is connected, watching YouTube videos. And I'm not criticizing them, I'm not yelling at them, and they're not annoyed with me. And we're existing in the same space, and everything is fine and it's working.
Okay.
And once you can achieve that level of connection, you can move on to the next level. And that next level is doing something side by side. Maybe it is driving in the car and listening to music. Maybe it's watching The Office together at night after dinner, doing something where you're in the same shared activity, but you're not necessarily interacting. And
Mhm.
once you can achieve mastery at that level, the final level is an interactive activity, a conversation at the dinner table, a deeper talk. Maybe it's playing a board game together and having conversation. But with anything, we don't want to go from 0 to 100. We want to take small steps so we can be successful.
That it makes a lot of sense because a lot of parents will immediately jump to, I feel disconnected from you. Let's go spend some really good quality time together, which makes sense. But that may not be accessible for the teen at that point. And so being able to approach it to a level of comfort, it
Mhm.
really puts it into a very clear pathway to
We
get
want
to the
to, right. We want to make sure we have the right skills to get to that deep
yes.
connection, and we don't have them all at once. So it's working up to that.
And it takes so much patience. Parenting involves a lot of patience,
For
and that
sure.
comes with being able to be patient with yourself, be patient with your team, be patient with the process, which it sounds like is all information that you're sharing in your book. I know you have your book, and of course, I'm going to link that in the show notes. You also have a program for teens in Pennsylvania,
Mhm.
Creative Healing. And tell me a little bit more about that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, creative healing is my group practice. I lead a team of 20 therapists, and we specialize in teens and their parents, mostly using what a modality called DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. And so it is the gold standard treatment for individuals with suicidal or self harm behaviors. And we also work with teens with anxiety, depression, low self esteem, eating disorders, trauma, all of the above. I love the team that we've gathered because we have devoted our lives to that adolescent population. I often feel like teens get lost in the shuffle, that it's kids and teens or teens and adults, and they're just kind of this like middle child. I'm also a middle child, so I feel some type of way about that. But I really felt that they needed a place that was just for them, where they could be themselves and not be judged, and be bright and weird and whatever they wanted to be, and that they would be accepted while also learning skills to improve and having people help their parents support them and reconnect to them. And so that's what we do. We work with families in Pennsylvania, and we can also see families virtually in Florida.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just going to ask you that because I know a lot of my listeners don't live near you. And
Yeah.
so obviously, unfortunately, you're not worldwide, which would be great if you could be, which is why you have your book and people can learn from your book. Are there any other resources you would recommend on this topic that could help parents through this process?
Yeah, so I also have a membership connected to my book. It's you'reonfireitsfine.com, and it really does dig deeper into the concepts in the book, as well as have support for office hours, community support for parents, other places that they can seek information. Myself and team members are in there providing support. In addition to myself and my team, I would say Dr. Alan Frizzetti has some great programming for teens and parents with self-destructive behaviors. He's referenced in my book, was an inspiration for some of what I created as well. And there are other programs out there. I would recommend looking for a dialectical behavior therapy program that works with adolescents in your area if what I'm offering isn't accessible to where you are.
Great. Those are all super helpful. So, thank you for sharing all of that. Obviously, I'll put links to everything that you mentioned in the show notes so that parents can click on that. Are there any other words of advice or words of comfort and wisdom you'd like to share before we wrap things up here?
Yes, one of the things that I think is always important to mention when we're working with parents is that parenting is forever a grieving process. And I have experienced it as a parent, and I see it in almost every parent that I work with, whether your teen is engaging in self destructive behaviors or has mental health issues, and you have this experience of, this is not the life I imagined. When I was holding my baby in my arms, I didn't imagine that they would be hurting themselves when they were a teenager. And so realigning your life because it's different than how you imagined it is a grieving process. But also the idea that as your child grows up, they become a teenager, they become a young adult, they become further and further from somebody that you once knew and that relied on you, and it really forces you to figure out who you are in relation to them, but also just who you are. And so I think
Mhm.
that's all a grieving process, is you're continuing to lose the person you love the most as they grow and become more autonomous from you.
Yeah, and that's something that's often overlooked in our
Mhm.
society is that gradual letting go of the child and starting to embrace the adult. And that
Mhm.
can be really hard on parents for sure. And also very hard on the kids. You know, it's a definitely a grieving process for them as well. So that's a really important point. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you, of course, for coming onto the show. This barely scratched the surface probably of the things that you're offering in your book. So definitely go check out the book, listeners. You will learn a lot of information from Katie there. And I really appreciate you coming onto the show. And I'll chat with you soon.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me into the conversation.
All right. Bye bye. If you liked this episode, I'd like to invite you to join Raising Happy Teens, my free online community for parents of teenagers, where every week I host Ask a Coach. You bring your parenting questions, and I provide expert advice and coaching. Click the link in the show notes to join today. I'll see you inside.